Maybe the top HBCU prospect this year is Isaiah Land, an outside linebacker, edge rusher out of Florida A&M, coming in at 6'3", 236, really explosive off the edge, a speed rusher who can win with his speed. That speed's going to translate to the next level. This year, 7.5 sacks, 11.5 tackles for loss, but it was really the 2021 season that put him on the map. 19 sacks, 25.5 tackles for loss, a ridiculous 2021 season. Really had him on a lot of people's boards. The East-West Shrine Bowl 1000 this past summer. At his pro day the other day, a 4.6 240, a 34.5-inch vert. This was a guy who, like I mentioned for Aubrey Miller, was down at the Senior Bowl, had a good performance there, won some of his one-on-one reps. I'm looking forward to seeing what Land can do at the next level. He's going to be the high-profile guy this year. Would love to see him be a day 3 pick. I could even see him going as high as the 4th or 5th round. Isaiah Land has upside for the NFL. One of my favorite receivers around this year is Xavier Smith out of Florida A&M. Just a really well-rounded, complete pass catcher. During his time at A&M, 228 receptions, 2,893 yards, and 25 touchdowns. This year in particular, 87 receptions, 1,021 yards, and 11 touchdowns. This is a guy who's a real playmaker, can win a lot of different ways, has that vertical threat ability. Love the way that he gets off the line of scrimmage, really clean off the line of scrimmage, and a crisp route runner as well, and someone that I think will develop in all of those avenues in the next level. I think this is a guy who really has a lot of upside. We talked about Xavier Smith. He's coming in at 5'10". Let's look at some of these bigger frame receivers. Let's start it out with Shaq Davis, wide receiver out of South Carolina State, coming in at 6'4", 217. Had a good season this year, 29 receptions, 662 yards, 7 touchdowns. You see that receptions to yards disparity. This is a guy who won a lot vertically, caught a lot of deep balls, made a lot of big plays, home run threat. Had a good performance down in the 2021 Celebration Bowl. Helped South Carolina State win that game over Jackson State. This year, he was down at the East-West Shrine Bowl, made some plays there, had some nice catches in the one-on-one portions of practice, and then down at his pro day at South Carolina, ran a 4.440, coming in at 6'4", 217, running a 4.4. That's going to catch your eye right there. And then we've got Jadakis Bonds, someone I mentioned back in October in one of my first draft videos on this channel, someone that I've been watching since the 2019 season. Had 70 receptions, 943 yards, and 15 touchdowns that season. I was working in the personnel department for a National Arena League football team, watching some other players from Hampton, and Jadakis Bonds caught my eye that year. He's been on my futures board for 3 years now through the COVID year. Great to see him finally getting this opportunity at the next level and really taking advantage of it. Having a nice performance down at the East-West Shrine Bowl, coming in at 6'4", 200. This is going to be a guy who fits the mold of what a lot of NFL teams are looking for. I think Jadakis Bonds, like Xavier Smith, they're different receivers, obviously, but is a very complete receiver. A guy who does a nice job winning off the line of scrimmage, is a really crisp route runner, smooth in his routes, really reliable, sure-handed receiver Jadakis Bonds is. Been a big fan of his game. Can't wait to see where he lands in the NFL. Going to be someone I'm easily rooting for. This is practice squad, late round, undrafted free agent type of range all day. I think he's a home run type of pick. Quick hitters here at receiver, CJ Bolar, receiver out of Alcorn State. He caught my eye in the HBCU Legacy Bowl one-on-ones. He transferred to Alcorn State from Vanderbilt. Does a good job winning off the line of scrimmage. And then Devon McCoy, receiver out of Clark, Atlanta. Another guy who caught my eye in those one-on-one portions of the HBCU Legacy Bowl. We've got J.J. Holloman, a big-bodied wide receiver out of Tennessee State. And then Darius Hagans, a running back wide receiver hybrid, slot type of guy coming out of Virginia State. One of the more popular draft prospects from the HBCU ranks this year is Kemari Averett, a tight end out of Bethune Cookman, coming in at 6'6", 250. Obviously, very ideal size for the NFL. Began his career by playing 2 seasons at Louisville, caught 15 passes, 144 yards, and 3 touchdowns during his time at Louisville. This year at Bethune Cookman, 39 receptions, 445 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Big body target, like I mentioned, ideal NFL size, really talented pass catcher. Would love to see him continue to develop at the next level. I mentioned both these guys in my FCS draft video, but I'd be remiss to not mention Aubrey Miller, Jackson State linebacker, the SWAC Defensive Player of the Year, led the league in tackles, over 100 tackles this year. And then Dallas Daniels, a transfer to Jackson State from Eastern Illinois this year, who really broke out as one of their top receivers, did a good job filling that void after Shane Hollywood Hooks graduated from Jackson State. Daniels really crisp, smooth route runner, guy who's going to win in the slot at the next level. Both of these players were at the Shrine Bowl. Aubrey Miller was down at the Senior Bowl with Isaiah Land as well. 2 guys who will definitely be in the NFL next summer. Let's start it out with Tony Gray, their left tackle over these years. Came to Jackson State from UCF, was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school. Really high caliber, professional quality tackle. I think he's lost a little bit of the buzz this year, dealt with some injuries during this season, but did a great job protecting and anchoring the offensive line for Shedeur Sanders. We've got Mark Evans, an offensive guard out of Arkansas Pine Bluff, was down at the Shrine Bowl, did some good things there, didn't have the best week at the Shrine Bowl, but a guy who nonetheless I think has NFL upside. Played left tackle at Pine Bluff, obviously is going to look to move inside to guard. This is a guy who has practice squad written all over him. Maybe he's a 6th or 7th round pick. He's in that type of range where he could be a draft pick, but definitely a guy who I think will be in a camp and could be on a practice squad next year. Heading to the offensive line, outside of Mark Evans, Robert Mitchell is another offensive lineman with a lot of buzz, coming off the national champion, Celebration Bowl champion, North Carolina Central. A guy with some interior offensive line versatility, played guard at NC Central, took some snaps at center during the HBCU Legacy Bowl. That's only going to help his upside at the next level. Let's look at Jackson State's secondary in particular, starting it out with Dejon Nugget Warren. Picked Jackson State over the likes of Georgia, Alabama, had over 35 offers coming out of Lackawanna JUCO, was the number 1 JUCO college prospect in the country. When I look at Warren's film, I see a long corner, a guy who can win in press coverage, is really smooth in his back pedal, has fluid hips. I think he has a lot of upside. Like I mentioned with Tony Gray, this is a professional quality player. That's kind of what I see when I look at Dejon Warren. Another professional quality corner is Isaiah Bolden, who came to Jackson State by way of Florida State. Another guy, a long corner, coming in at 6'2", 205. A really dynamic playmaker, was a good kick returner for Jackson State in 2021. I think both of these guys should definitely be in NFL camps next year. Had professional quality coaching at Jackson State, worked with the likes of Deion Sanders, Coach Deion Sanders, and the rest of that coaching staff. I think both of these guys are NFL quality corners. Joshua Pryor, a defensive end out of Bowie State from Baltimore, really put himself on the map during the pre-draft process. Had a nice week down at the HBCU Legacy Bowl, coming in at 6'4", 280, has NFL caliber size. This year, 10.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. Could be a guy who contributes in that run game. You'd like to see over 10 tackles for loss. And the week that he put together at the HBCU Legacy Bowl, that's really where he shined, beating defensive linemen inside. Looking forward to seeing what he does coming out of Bowie State. Next up, let's look at Jason Dumas, a defensive tackle out of Southern and Prairie View A&M. Has some fullback versatility as well, has dabbled with some of that in the pre-draft process. Had a great performance down at the HBCU Legacy Bowl. He was the defensive MVP, had a sack in the game, and also had a really good performance at the New Orleans Saints local pro day. This is a guy who at Southern this year had 5.5 tackles, 2.5 sacks. At 5'10", 280, doesn't have ideal NFL size, but his low pad level, his low center of gravity is a big cause for him to be able to generate a lot of power. Has a really powerful frame, is a disruptive interior defensive lineman. That fullback versatility could play into his favor. Looking forward to seeing what Dumas does at the next level. Another defensive lineman who can contribute on the interior, KeShaun Moore, a defensive lineman out of Hampton, coming in at 6'2", 279. I think he's the perfect type of player for a 3-4 defensive end fit. Really does a good job disengaging off offensive linemen, especially in the run game. This is a strong defensive lineman against the run this year. 58 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks. Really impressed me with the way that he disengages from blocks, gets off blocks. Began his college career down at James Madison, a Virginia guy who spent time at James Madison and Hampton. Had a really good showing at his pro day, a 4'8", 340, 36.5-inch vert, and 37 bench press reps, which would have led all defensive linemen at the combine. That athleticism might be some of the reason that the WWE signed Moore to an NIL deal over the summer. Jermaine McDaniel Jr., a defensive end, edge rusher, coming out of North Carolina A&T, coming in at 6'2", 239 pounds, transferred to A&T from Appalachian State, a North Carolina guy. This year at NC A&T, 40 tackles, 12 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks, and 3 pass deflections. A guy who the USFL was looking at. He was recently drafted by the New Jersey Generals in their recent college draft. NC A&T, always a team who puts out a lot of NFL draft prospect. McDaniel is next in line. Two talented HBCU defenders have already signed professional contracts. Brooke Parker from Delaware State, middle linebacker, has signed with the CFL's BC Lions. And then Ronnie Thomas, an outside linebacker, edge rusher from Mississippi Valley State, has signed with the CFL's Calgary Stampeders. Parker's a really solid middle linebacker. He reminds me of Jameer Thurman, who signed with Calgary out of the Illinois State, the FCS ranks, wound up spending some time with the Chicago Bears and the XFL with DC. I think Brooks Parker's a similar type of guy, really physical, does a good job finishing his tackles. He's going to have success with BC. And then Ronnie Thomas, a game changer off the edge, a really speedy edge rusher, has some similarities to what Isaiah Land has. Some of the traits that people love about Isaiah Land you can find in Ronnie Thomas as well. A guy who's real lanky off the edge, has some versatility, can drop in some traditional outside linebacker roles. I'm a fan of both these guys. I think they have NFL upside, but I'm a fan of the CFL. I'm a fan of watching them in the CFL. I mentioned it in my small school videos. Some of these guys I mentioned, I'm going to talk about them real quick here. Emanuel Wilson, a guy who I'm a big fan of, running back out of Fort Valley State, really physical runner. Love the way he runs in between the tackles. Think he has a lot of upside as a physical guy. He's going to go under the radar this year, but if he gets into a camp, I think he's going to be a guy who lights it up in practice and could have some preseason touchdowns. Let's look at Andrew Farmer, a defensive lineman out of Lane. 17.5 sacks and 44 tackles for loss over the past 2 seasons. This year, in only 8 games, 25 tackles for loss, had the most tackles for loss per game in the country, and 6 sacks to go with it. Was down at the HBCU Combine and the Hula Bowl. At the HBCU Combine, 4.72 40, 38-inch verts, and a 9.10 broad jump. Similar to Caleb Murphy, another D2 defensive lineman that's definitely going to be in camp somewhere and could look to stick on a practice squad or roster.